Wyoming Territory, summer of 1880, the wind carried dust down the empty road into Willow Creek like a whisper from the past. Flint Oakes drew his horse to a halt just outside the general store, the timber porch groaning under his boots as he stepped down. He tied the reins loosely and adjusted the brim of his hat low over his eyes. His face was weathered but steady, a man carved out of years spent riding alone, burying what he had no strength left to remember. Inside the store, it was quiet except for the ticking of a wall clock and the soft rustle of dry goods being stacked by a boy no older than 12. Flint gave a nod, grabbed a tin of coffee and a sack of oats, and dropped them on the counter. He barely spoke these days unless he had to. The world had taken too much. His wife in the fever 6 years ago, his baby girl buried beside her. Some men rebuilt after loss. Flint never did. He stepped back outside, jaw tightening as he looked toward the mountains. He had come down for supplies, but something prickled at the back of his neck. A feeling. It made him pause. That was when he saw her. She stood barefoot on the edge of town, where the dirt road met the grassland. Her dress was torn at the hem, her hair loose and tangled like it had not seen a brush in weeks. Her arms were wrapped around herself, like she was holding in more than just the cold. But it was her eyes that stopped him. Wide, searching, then locking on him like she had known him her whole life. "Flint," she said, her voice rough with thirst. "Flint Oakes." He stared at her, stunned. "Do I know you?" She shook her head. "No." "But I know you." He walked toward her slowly, scanning the horizon. "No wagon. No horse. No one else." "You hurt?" he asked. She swayed, and he caught her before she fell. Her skin was hot from sunburn, lips cracked. She had been walking a long time. "Come on," he said, guiding her toward his horse. "You need water." I did not know where else to go," she whispered. "You knew my name," he said, lifting her gently into the saddle before swinging up behind her. "That's enough to get my attention." He rode her to his small homestead on the edge of the pine woods, a few miles west of town. The log cabin was simple, but sturdy. He laid her down on the cot near the fire, brought her water, and waited. She slept through the night. By morning, she was sitting up, quiet but alert. She watched him from the cot while he boiled coffee and cracked eggs into a skillet. "My name's Willa," she said finally. He turned toward her, nodding once. "All right. Willa Whitlow." "You from around here?" he asked. She looked down at her hands. "No. I came from Arkansas. I was headed west. I lost everything." He waited for her to say more, but she only looked out the window. "You got family?" "No," she said. "Not anymore." He brought her the plate and a cup of coffee. She took it with both hands, careful, grateful. "I do not know how I knew your name," she admitted. "I was walking for days. I was half out of my mind. Then I saw you, and I just knew." Flint sat across from her, arms folded over his chest, eyes fixed on her like she might vanish if he blinked. "I do not talk about myself much," he said. "But I had a wife. Daughter, too. Fever took them both. Long time back. I am sorry." He nodded once, like he had learned to live with it long ago, but the pain behind his eyes said otherwise. "I have not spoken to anyone in weeks," she said. "I was with a wagon train. They left me behind when I got sick. Took my horse. All I had was my name and your name in my head." Flint stared at her, quiet. The fire popped behind them. "You saved me," she said, voice low. He looked down into his coffee. "Maybe you saved me too." They said nothing after that for a long time. But something shifted between them. A quiet tether. Willa stayed. She cleaned up, helped in the garden, mended the fence when Flint was gone hunting. They barely spoke most days, but their silences were comfortable. She never asked more than he wanted to offer. He never pushed her to explain what she had been through. One warm afternoon, he found her standing at the edge of the field, watching the grass sway. "You think you will ever go back east?" he asked. She turned to him, her face soft. "There is nothing there for me." He nodded, stepping beside her. "I dreamed of this place once," she said. "The trees, the quiet, even you. I did not know it then, but I think I was dreaming of peace." He looked at her, long and steady. "I never thought I would feel anything again." She turned, meeting his eyes. "But you do." He nodded.
"Yeah, I do."
For the first time, she smiled, and it reached her eyes. That night, they sat by the fire beneath the stars. He had built the bench years ago, but it had never felt full until now. Willa leaned her head against his shoulder, and he let his hand rest over hers. Neither spoke. They did not have to. But Flint knew. He had thought he would never love again. And yet here she was, this lost woman who had known his name before he spoke it, fitting into the hollow places of his life, like she had always been meant to be there. The morning air held a coolness that clung to the skin, rising off the damp grass like breath. Flint had taken to feeding the chickens earlier now, not for the sake of the birds, but because Willa had begun rising with the sun, and he liked the sound of her steps on the porch behind him. She didn't speak most mornings, just stood there in her shawl, eyes on the hills, like she was watching for something only she could see. "You ever handle a rifle?" he asked without looking back. "No," she said. "But I'd like to." He turned, studying her. She met his gaze, without flinching. "There's a .36 sharps in the barn. She kicks, but she's clean." She nodded once, and followed him across the damp yard. Inside the barn, the light cut through the boards in quiet shafts, dust hanging in the air like pollen. He handed her the rifle, watched her fingers wrap around the stock.
"Show me how you hold it," he said.
She brought it up, awkward but willing, and he stepped behind her, adjusting her grip with a quiet patience. "You're holding too tight. Let it rest against you, don't fight it." "My father wouldn't let me near his guns," she said. "Said I'd break my shoulder or my pride." "Your father's still living?" No, she didn't offer more, and he didn't ask. She fired once. The sound cracked through the still air. The can he'd lined on the fence post tipped over, without drama. Flint nodded. Again. By noon, her shoulder was red and tender, but she'd hit more than she missed. He handed her a water dipper and leaned against the post beside her. "You ever think about staying?" "I have," she said. "But I wasn't sure it was allowed." "Allowed?" She looked down at the rifle between her knees. "I came here with nothing but your name in my head. No past worth carrying.
No papers.
Just a woman who lost too much and kept walking." He shifted, looking out over the fields. "What you came with doesn't matter." Her brow furrowed. "Then what does?" He didn't answer right away. Just watched the clouds roll low over the horizon. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "What you do with the days ahead. That's what counts." That night, she cleared the table without being asked, humming to herself while Flint sat by the fire, a ledger open across his knees. The math was simple: seed, salt, bullets. But his eyes kept drifting to where she moved around the small kitchen, sleeves rolled to her elbows, hair pinned back with one of the old combs she'd found in the drawer beside the stove. He hadn't heard humming in the house since before the fever. "You can read?" she asked, drying her hands. He looked up. "Well enough." "I never learned," she said, crossing to the hearth. "My ma tried, but the days were long and the nights were filled with noise. We never stayed anywhere long." He closed the ledger, set it aside. "You want to?" She hesitated. "I'm not sure I'd take to it. Only one way to find out." She sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. "All right then." He reached for the Bible on the mantel, not out of piety, but because it was the only book with wide letters and short verses. He pointed to the first line. "This here says, 'In the beginning.' You try." She leaned forward, sounding it out under her breath. then again stronger.
In the
Beginning. He nodded. Good. Her eyes lit with a spark he hadn't seen before. Again, they read until the fire burned low and the oil lamp flickered. When she finally stood, her voice was quiet. Thank you. He folded the book shut. You're welcome. She hesitated, then stepped closer, one hand resting on the back of his chair. Flint. He looked up. Do you believe in signs? He thought about her standing on that road, saying his name before he spoke. About the rifle in her hands, the sound of her voice in the morning. I'm starting to. She touched his shoulder, just lightly, but something in it made the air feel different. Like the house had taken a breath. Then she turned and climbed the stairs. He sat there long after the fire dimmed, the quiet not empty anymore, but full of something he hadn't felt in years.
hope.
The first frost came quietly in the night, leaving a pale film across the window panes and a brittle hush over the grass. Flint rolled out of bed before the light had come, pulling on his coat with slow, practiced movements. He heard Willa shifting in the other room, the creak of mattress springs, the soft tread of her feet across the floorboards. She didn't speak, but he knew she'd be on the porch soon, watching the sun rise through the trees. By the time she stepped outside, he was already at the woodpile, splitting logs. Her shawl was wrapped tight around her shoulders, but her eyes were clear. You ever trap before? He asked, not looking up from the axe.
No, she said.
But I'd learn. Coyote's been nosing through the henhouse. Left tracks down by the creek. I'll go with you. He paused, met her gaze. You sure? I'm not made of glass. He nodded once, then tossed the last log onto the stack. They took the trail behind the barn, winding down through the narrow ravine where the creek ran thin in the colder months. Flint carried the trap slung over his shoulder, a coil of wire tucked beneath his arm. Willa kept pace beside him, boots crunching over the frost-hardened earth, her breath visible in the morning chill. They set 5 traps near the bend where the animal had left a pattern in the mud. Willa watched his hands carefully as he positioned the jaws and packed dirt around the springs. Why here? She asked. Coyote's clever, he said. Likes to skirt the edge of scent. But they're creatures of habit. Step in the same place twice if they think it's safe. She crouched beside him, brushing a fern aside. That sounds like people. He gave a soft grunt of agreement. More than we like to admit. They were quiet walking back, the kind of quiet that held no weight, the kind that settled like a blanket over shared purpose. That afternoon, Willa sorted through the root cellar while Flint repaired the south fence. The wind had pulled a section loose, and the posts needed resetting. He worked until his hands were raw, the sun dipping low behind the ridge before he straightened and saw her coming down the path with a tin cup in hand. Brought you something warm, she said, offering the cup. He took it, steam rising from the rim. Tomato broth, she added. I bottled the last of before we lose the rest to cold. He drank, then handed it back with a nod. You always work this hard? I didn't used to. But I didn't used to have a place worth it. He studied her face, the way her hair curled beneath the scarf, the faint smudge of dirt on her cheek she hadn't noticed. You ever think about building something here? He asked. She tilted her head. Like what? Something that lasts. Not just surviving. Living. Willa looked down at the cup in her hands, then up again. I think about it every day. That evening, he found her sewing by lantern light, mending the tear in the hem of a second-hand skirt she'd taken in. She didn't look up when he came in, just kept stitching, her fingers moving with quiet purpose. I've got an old stove in the shed, he said. Cast iron. Needs cleaning, but it'd make bread if someone knew how. I can bake, she said, threading the needle through again. I just need a proper pan. I'll bring one from town next week. She nodded, then set the cloth aside. You planning on going alone? I always have. You don't have to. He met her eyes then, the space between them filled with something unspoken but steady.
No, he said.
I don't. She stood slowly, stepped toward him. You've let me stay, fed me, taught me more than anyone ever has. But I don't want to keep being something you carry. You're not, he said. I want to be part of the weight you choose. He reached for her hand, rough fingers closing around hers. You already are. They stood there, the lantern casting long shadows across the walls, the air between them warm despite the cold creeping in outside. I was lost when I found you, she said quietly. But I don't feel lost anymore. Flint didn't speak. He just pulled her gently into his arms, and she came without hesitation. Outside, the wind moved through the pine, but inside the cabin, there was only the sound of two hearts finding the same rhythm. Late October brought more than frost. The air turned sharper, and the whispering sounds in the woods quieted, as if even the birds held their breath. Flint rode out early one morning with the saddle blanket pulled high and his rifle slung behind him. He had spotted elk tracks the week before, and meat would be needed soon if they meant to get through the long months ahead. Willa stayed behind, not idle. She gathered the last of the drying beans, tied bunches of sage and yarrow to hang beside the hearth. She'd found a rhythm that belonged to her now, not borrowed, not temporary, and that steadiness showed in the way she walked through the house, sleeves rolled, hair tied back with a strip of old curtain she'd stitched herself. By the time Flint returned near dusk, a brace of partridge over his saddle and a strip of blood along his sleeve, she had a pot warming and water ready. You're cut, she said, motioning to his arm. Barb spruce, he muttered. Reached for the bird, didn't see it. Let me clean it.
He didn't argue.
She rolled his sleeve back gently and poured boiled water over the wound. He flinched just once. Her fingers were careful but sure, and he watched her face as she worked. There was no hesitation in her anymore. You ever think of leaving again? He asked. Her hands paused, then resumed. Sometimes. In dreams. But when I wake, I'm glad I stayed. You never told me what you were running from. I still don't want to, she said. But I will. He waited.
There was a man, she said at last.
He was my husband. Not by choice, but by law. He traded in debts and liquor, and I was one of both. When he died in a fire, I didn't mourn.
Flint didn't speak.
The fire cracked behind them. I walked west with a wagon train. Lied to get a place among them. Said I was a widow with kin in Idaho. I got sick along the way. They left me just south of the Platte, took everything but my name. And mine, Flint said. She nodded. And yours. He reached for her hand. You've got more than that now. That night, they ate quietly salt pork and boiled squash, and afterward Flint brought the old stove inside from the shed. It took 2 hours to clean it, the grime thick and the hinges stiff. Willa scrubbed beside him until her knuckles reddened. This stove's older than both of us put together, she said, wiping her brow. Still works, he said. Just needed tending. She looked at him, eyes tired but warm. So did I. The next morning, Flint hitched the wagon and drove to town. Willa stayed behind, not because she was afraid, but because she wanted to bake her first loaf of bread in that old stove, and because the chickens wouldn't feed themselves. When he returned late in the afternoon, the air smelled of flour and brown crust. He carried a wooden crate down from the wagon bed. Inside were 2 pans, a sack of flour, and a small, folded cloth bundle. What's that? She asked, wiping her hands on her apron. He handed her the bundle. She opened it slowly. Inside was a new comb bone-handled, with carved ivy along the spine, and a spool of blue thread. You once said you never had things of your own, he said. She touched the comb like it might vanish. Why blue? He shrugged. Seemed like it'd suit you. She smiled, a quiet, steady thing that settled beneath her ribs and didn't leave. That evening, After the bread had cooled and the last light had faded into the trees, she found him out by the fence, mending a broken rail with his sleeves rolled up and sawdust on his palms.
"Flint," she said.
He looked up. "I want to stay." "You already have."
"No," she said.
"I mean, I want to make a life here. With you." He set down the hammer. Walked toward her across the dimming yard, boots brushing through dry grass. "I've wanted to ask," he said. "But I didn't want to take anything from you that wasn't freely given." She reached for his hand. "You aren't taking anything. You're giving it back." He pulled her into his arms, slow and sure, like he was learning the shape of something he'd thought lost. Her face pressed to his chest. She closed her eyes. The wind moved through the tall grass, and the sky stretched above them, wide and quiet and full. Inside the house, the bread cooled on the table beside a single blue spool of thread. Outside, two people stood in the gathering dusk, not lost anymore. By early November, the last leaves had fallen, scattered across the packed dirt yard like parchment torn from old books. Flint had added a second chimney flue to the cabin, and Willa had taken to wearing woolen mitts she stitched herself from scraps of an old blanket. The cold had settled in for good, but the house no longer felt like a place people passed through. It felt rooted. Flint stood at the edge of the pasture, hammering a final post into the frozen ground. A neighbor from 3 ridges over had offered him a pair of milk goats in exchange for a load of timber, and the pen needed finishing before the animals arrived. Willa stood nearby, holding a coil of rope and watching the horizon. "You ever seen a goat give birth?" Flint asked, his breath clouding. "No," she said, shifting her grip on the rope. "But I've helped a woman do it." He raised an eyebrow. "In a mining camp. She was alone. Everyone else too drunk or scared to help. I boiled water, wrapped the baby, stayed with her till morning." He leaned on the post, studying her. "You never told me that." "You never asked," she said, brushing hair from her face. "I've done all kinds of things. Most of 'em hard. Some of 'em good." Flint nodded. That one was good. She gave a quiet sound in her throat, not quite laughter. "I've wondered if any of it mattered." "It does," he said. "All of it." They finished the gate before dusk, hands raw and faces flushed. Willa lit the lamp when they came in, and Flint pulled off his boots near the stove. The bread she'd made earlier had cooled, and she cut 2 thick slices, added a slab of salt butter they'd churned last week. "You ever think about putting in a second room?" she asked, handing him a plate. He took it, chewing thoughtfully. "You want more space?" "I want a place for a cradle." He looked up. She didn't waver. "I'm late." He sat back in the chair, eyes on her face. "You sure?" "Been counting days since the first frost." "I'm sure." He set the plate down, stood, and crossed the space between them slowly. "You all right with it?" he asked. "I never thought I would be," she said. "But now I am." He touched her face, calloused thumb brushing her cheek. "Then so am I." They stood in the warm light, the silence soft around them. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old shutters. Flint placed his hand over her stomach, reverent and unsure, like he was touching a future he hadn't dared to imagine. They didn't say more that night, but when they lay down, it was with her head against his chest and his hand still resting where new life had taken hold. The days grew shorter. Flint traded the timber and came back with the goats. Willa began knitting a small blanket from scraps of wool she bartered from a rancher's wife. They moved in step now, him checking the trap lines, her tending the firewood and keeping dry roots strung in the eaves. In the evenings, he read aloud from the Bible, slow and sure, Willa following each word with her finger as she learned each shape and sound. One morning, she turned to him as he buttoned his coat. "You think it's time?" "For what?" She lifted a hand to the base of her throat. "To speak vows." He didn't answer right away. He set his coat aside, walked across the room, and took her hand. "There's a circuit preacher coming through Red Willow before the snows get bad," he said. "We go together, say the words in front of God and whoever's there. Then we come home. You and me proper." She nodded. "I'd like that. Then we'll do it." They rode out 5 days later, bundled against the cold, Flint's hand around hers as they crossed the ridge. The preacher was an old man with a crooked back and clear eyes, and he married them in a schoolhouse with pine boughs strung across the windows. A rancher's daughter lent Willa a shawl of lace, and they stood hand in hand beneath the chalkboard, saying quiet vows that felt louder than any storm. They returned home the next morning. The snow began that night. They cut more wood, salted more meat, and waited out the winter. The goats settled into the pen, and Flint added a narrow room off the back of the cabin, just wide enough for a cradle. By February, Willa's belly had begun to round beneath her dresses, and Flint built a rocking chair from pine he felled himself. The baby arrived in early June, when the grass was high and fresh with dew. Willa labored long but steady, teeth clenched, sweat on her brow. Flint stayed beside her, wiping her face, holding her hand, steady as stone. When the child let out her first cry, Willa laughed a deep, shaking sound that echoed through the cabin like a bell. Flint took the girl into his arms, eyes wet, voice caught in his throat. They named her Margaret, after Willa's mother. That night, as the child slept in the cradle Flint carved, Willa leaned against him on the porch. The stars stretched wide overhead. The smell of pine and earth was thick in the air. "You ever think we have this?" she asked. "No," he said. "But I wanted it." She laid her hand on his chest. "I did too, even before I knew how to name it." He turned to her, pressing his lips to her temple. "You gave me back my life." She looked up, eyes full. "And you gave me mine." The cabin stood strong through the years. Flint built a new shed, and Willa planted a garden that grew thick with squash, carrots, and beans. Margaret learned to walk on that soil. She spoke her first words beside that hearth. Flint taught her how to hold a hammer. Willa taught her to read. They aged slowly, with a kind of grace only earned through hardship. Their love never frayed, only deepened, woven into every nail, every thread, every quiet night spent hand in hand. They never left the land. Together, they lived a life honest and full, stitched together not by chance, but by choice. And in each season, with each turn of the earth, they faced it side by side. Their love held, always.